Círoבין, continuing Perek Ches, Mishnah Daled. Hanoisin is Círoבין b'beis shar. If someone places his Eruv in a gatehouse was a small structure by the opening of the chutzner where a guard was posted to keep non-residents from entering the chutzner. So Hanoisin is Círoבין b'beis shar, Achsadra merpeses. An Achsadra is a structure, a portico, is a structure with the roof supported by 4 columns and no walls, or a merpeset, which is a porch. Ein Eruv, it's not a valid Eruv because these structures are unfit to live in. And if someone lives in one of these and does not contribute to the Eruv, he does not prohibit others from carrying between their homes and the chutzner. Since the person is staying in a structure that's unfit to live in, he is not a resident of the courtyard of the chutzner, so the Eruv is good, even without his participation. The occupant of the building that's not fit to live in it is not considered a resident of the chutzner and is thus not required to contribute food to the Eruv. The Mishnah lists some examples of buildings that are not homes but are nevertheless fit to live in. If an Eruv is placed in a shed that's used for straw, or a barn, or a woodshed, or a storehouse located in the chutzner, Hareza Eruv, this is a good Eruv because these buildings are fit to live in. And the same halacha applies. If someone lives in one of these buildings and does not contribute to the Eruv, this asks the other residents from carrying between their homes and the chutzner. Since the person is staying in a livable building, he's considered a toshav of the chutzner, and the Eruv is invalid without his participation. Rabbi Yehuda says, if the owner of the chutzner still has a hand in the building he rented or lent to someone, meaning that the owner reserved the right to store his own belongings somewhere in that building and did so for at least this Shabbos, then the occupant does not forbid the owner from carrying between his home and the chutzner if he fails to contribute to the Eruv. Since the owner did not totally withdraw from the building, he is the legal resident and the occupant of the building is viewed as his guest, and guests are not required to contribute to Iruvei Chatzeres. Mishnah Hey. To establish a Iruvei Chatzeres in a Chatzar where Goyim live as well, the Yidden need to rent the rights of the Goyish residents, as we spoke in the beginning of Parak Vav. In addition, all the Yiddish residents must contribute to the Eruv. The Mishnah discusses whether these 2 requirements apply to residents who left the Chatzar for Shabbos. So Hameniach Beisai, someone who left his house, he went out of town, whether that person is a Goy who did not rent his rights to the Jewish residents, or a Yid who did not contribute to the Eruv, Hareza Oiser, he forbids the remaining residents from carrying because he's considered a resident of the Chatzar even while he's out of town. Rabbi Yehuda says he does not ask them from carrying. Only those who are actually present in the chutzner on Shabbos are considered the residents of the chutzner. Rabbi Yossi says a guy who left town asks the Jewish residents from carrying unless they rented his rights. But a Yid who left town without contributing to the Eruv doesn't forbid the residents from carrying. For it's not usual for Yid to return home on Shabbos if he was out of town when Shabbos began. Rabbi Yossi agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that if someone's away from home for an entire Shabbos, he need not participate in his chutzner's Eruv for that Shabbos. Since a Yid who leaves town for Shabbos usually returns only after Shabbos is over, so he doesn't ask the residents of his chutzner from carrying if he failed to contribute to the Eruv. But a guy who leaves town for Shabbos might return on Shabbos itself. Since we don't know whether he'll be away for the entire Shabbos, he does answer the Yidden from carrying unless they rented his chutzner's rights. Reb Shimon Aimer, the more mekel-digga view, the more kula-digga view. Reb Shimon says, if a Yid left his house and went to spend Shabbos with his daughter, even in that same city, he doesn't ask the residents from carrying shekar hisiyam eliboy. He has already dismissed from his mind any thought of returning. It's very interesting because the Rab says this is something that we find elsewhere in the Gemara as well. Davka bitay. The Mishnah doesn't say bitay because it was like a specific case they were talking, because it was a random case. That's the derech. But Davka bitay, we're talking specifically by his daughter. The Ovid Inish, the Dairim Chasnai. It's very normal for a person to come and stay by his son-in-law. A person doesn't have a hesach hadas when he leaves his house to move to spend Shabbos with his son. Because maybe he's worried that his daughter-in-law is going to fight with him and he's going to want to leave. He may be uncomfortable together with his daughter-in-law, so he may want to leave. He therefore does not entirely dismiss the possibility of returning home on Shabbos, and therefore asers the other residents from carrying if he would be staying by his son's home. And it's interesting because Allah is like Reb Shimon over here. Just in the word of the Mishnah, Hisiya Miliboy. Many times in the Gemara we find this nusach of Hisiya as opposed to Hisiyach, but we know from the Hemaitzais Hapeh, from the 5 tools of enunciation of the mouth, that the ayin and the ches come from the same place, memela, from the chich. The aleph, the ches, and the ayin, they all come from that part, so they're interchangeable, and it is Lashon HaMishnah. Okay, Mishnah Vav. Bar shebein shtei chatzeros. What are we talking about here? The rest of the parak discusses the procedures for drawing or disposing of water in a chatzar and Shabbos. The Mishnah discusses 2 chatzeros that are joined together, separated by a wall. Each chatzar has its own eruv, but 2 have not joined in a common eruv together. So there's going to be different shittas in the Mishnah as to what must be done before any water may be drawn from a bar that's within both courtyards. The bar that we're talking about over here is a pool used to store water. The Mishnah discusses a bar shared by 2 adjoining courtyards that are separated by a wall, meaning that the bar is on either side of this wall. So bar shabein shtei chatzeros. If you have a water cistern that's shared by 2 chatzeros, and the wall that separates them passes over the top of the bar, leaving part of this bar in each chatzer, the residents of the chatzeros may not fill a bucket of water from it on Shabbos unless they made another mechitza inside the bar that's at least 10 tvachim high. Bein milmaila, bein milmata, bein miteich ognai. The partition, the mechitza, is good whether most of it's above the water or it's under the water, or whether it's entirely within the rim of the bar and doesn't even reach the water. Reb Shimon Gamliel says, he says over that Beis Shammai say that milmata. Beis Shammai say 9 tvachim in the mechitza must be below water, so that the waters of the 2 chatzeros are noticeably separated. However, they agree that the top tefach must be above the water so people standing near the bar can see the mechitza. Meaning, I think b'derech klal in hilchos mechitza, the mechitza has to be something that's recognizable. If a person doesn't recognize it, or won't view it as a mechitza because there's too much space in it, like we spoke in the beginning of the Masechta, about Indian parts of Merubah La'omed, or something Malkam Shahagadi Baikea Boy, is that there's a lot of big spaces in it, so then it won't be viewed as a mechitza. So over here, even if it's in the water, but nobody could see it, so then it may not be a good mechitza. So the question is, what about Kurachas? It's all part of the sugya. Beis Hillel Amri Mil Milo. Beis Hillel say that 9 tvachim of the mechitza may be above the water, and only 1 tefach needs to be below the water. Beis Hillel are matra mechitza that's mostly above the water, which looks like a mechitza. They don't require that at least 1 tefach be underwater, so that the resident will notice where the water of their chatzar ends, and not draw water directly from the other chatzar. According to Reb Shimon Gamliel, however, neither Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel are matter mechitza that's completely above the water, even if it's within the rim of the bar. Rabbi Yehuda says, the mechitza inside the bar shouldn't be more effective than the existing wall between the 2 chatzeros that passes over the top of the bar. Although the existing wall doesn't extend over the bar itself, it nevertheless creates a mechitza between the 2 chatzeros. And mamela, the water may be drawn without any additional partitions. Machlekes between Rabbi Yehuda and what Reb Shimon Gamliel said hinges on whether a suspended mechitza always creates a mechitza between 2 chatzeros. L'gabe hilchas eruvei chatzeros. Rabbi Yehuda holds that it does. Mechitza tuluya is a good mechitza. So although a part of the wall passing over the bar is suspended, it doesn't actually enter the bar, it's still considered a mechitza between the 2 chatzeros, and no more mechitza is needed in the bar. But the Tanakam Reb Shimon Gamliel are chaylik, and they hold that a mechitza tuluya does not create a mechitza for a chatzar. Since the wall over the bar is talui, the mechitza itself must be made within the bar itself. Nevertheless, they are matir a mechitza tuluya in specific cases where it looks like it was installed to separate in the mayim itself. Fine. Ad kan Mishnah Vav, Mishnah Zayin. Amas hamayim she'averes b'chatzar. The previous Mishnah, Mishnah Vav, we discussed the case of a bar that was shared by 2 chatzeros, presented in machlekes as to whether the wall, the mechitza tuluya al gabe habar, the wall that passes over the bar, is a mechitza between the 2. Does it help with the mechitza in the water between the 2 chatzeros? So now the Mishnah is going to apply the same machlekes to another source of water that's inside a single chatzar. You have a amas hamayim, you have a water canal that's coming from a river that passes through a chatzar. It was common to dig canals next to a river to bring water to places further away from the river. In this case, the canal flowed from the river into a chatzar under its walls and then flowed out back to the river. The Mishnah speaks of amas hamayim that's at least 10 tvachim deep and 4 tvachim wide. These shiurim make an independent rishus and not part of the chatzar. Since the amas hamayim is completely open at the ends of the river, which is considered a karmelis, the amas hamayim is treated as a karmelis also. If it's smaller, however, it wouldn't be considered a rishus of its own inside the chatzar, it would be batal to the chatzar b'pashtus. So again, amas hamayim sheveres b'chatzar, for water canal coming from a river passes through a chatzar, and the chatzar walls run over the top of the amas hamayim, so enclosing part of it within the chatzar. Ein memalin emena b'Shabbos, you may not draw water from the canal on Shabbos. Elam can also la mechitza gavaya asar tvachim, unless they make a mechitza within the canal itself that's 10 tvachim high to separate the chelak of the canal in the chatzar from the part outside of it. The mechitza must be placed within the banks of the canal and extend across the width so that people will see the mechitza being chaitzitz between the water inside the chatzar and the water outside the chatzar. Although the chatzar wall, the wall of the chatzar passes over the amas hamayim, so technically it separates part of the amas hamayim inside the chatzar from outside the chatzar, that wall doesn't look like it's doing that since it wasn't built for that purpose. Since the halacha for making a mechitza over amas hamayim are the same as for dividing a bar, the question of how much the mechitza must be submerged in the water is the machlekes that we discussed in the previous Mishnah, so we're not going to go into that again. So, ein memalin emena b'Shabbos, elam ken also la mechitza gavaya asar tvachim b'kniso b'yitzio. Unless they make a mechitza within the canal itself that's 10 tvachim high to separate the part of the canal that's in the chatzar and the part that's outside the chatzar. And they must make this partition, this mechitza, both at the canal's entrance to the chatzar and at the exit from the chatzar. The canal itself must be clearly enclosed within the borders of the chatzar. If only one side of the canal has a mechitza, the canal is still a karmelis, since it's completely open at the other end of the area outside the chatzar. Rabbi Yehuda says, the courtyard wall that passes over the amas hamayim may be considered a valid mechitza, even though it wasn't built specifically to separate the canal water. As such, the water may be drawn from the amas hamayim without placing new mechitzas within the canal. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ma'aseh ba'alma shel Ovel. It happened with a canal that flowed through the courtyard in the town of Ovel, an interesting name for a town, that they would draw water from it on Shabbos with Rishus and Alpi of these Canaan, the elders of the town, even though the Amas Hamayim had no mechitzas within it. Apparently, the elders of this Canaan accepted Rabbi Yehuda's shita that water may be drawn from an Amas Hamayim that has no mechitzas within it. Later, Chacham told Rabbi Yehuda, because the Amas Hamayim in that town didn't have the minimum dimensions this year to qualify as an independent domain. It was either less than 10 tvachim deep, or it was less than 4 tvachim wide, so it was lacking in the shiurim to qualify as a rishus of its own. So the canal is automatically considered part of the larger rishus hayocha that it's in. So it doesn't become a karmelis even if it's open to the karmelis outside. The chatzar's walls, therefore, are matir, just as it's matir the rest of the chatzar, meaning it's a regular chelik of the chatzar, so it's nishkein raya. In that case, all agree that the extra mechitzas are not needed to be matir drawing water from the canal. Had the canal been large enough to be considered a rishus of its own, however, the Zakanim would not have allowed water to be drawn from it without the mechitza inside the Amas Hamayim. Okay, interesting story, interesting halacha. Mishnah Ches. Gzuz Tero, shehi l'mayla min hamayim, if you have a balcony that extends over the water, such as a river, ein memalan emena b'Shabbos. So what are we talking about over here? There's a balcony that's above a river. The people living in the house that opens to the balcony, would draw water from the river through a hole in the floor in the porch, in this balcony. So the Mishnah explains how you can be memale mayim from here on Shabbos. So if a balcony extends over a body of water such as a river, ein memalan hemena b'Shabbos, you may not draw water from the river to the balcony on Shabbos, because the river is a karmelis and the balcony is a rishus hayochid. The balcony is attached to the wall in front of a window or door. Since the people inside the house have access to this gzuz tera, it's an extension of the house, which would be considered chayrei rishus hayochid. Literally, the holes in the rishus hayochid, but it's attached to the rishus hayochid. Therefore, even if the balcony itself is not enclosed within the mechitzas, it still has a rishus hayochid, because it's attached to the house. It has a din like the house itself. This is osir unless they make mechitzas that are 10 tefachim higher around the balcony or around the hole in the floor. Bein milmayla, bein milmata. The mechitzas are good whether they're above or below the balcony. Either way, we look at the mechitzas as extending downward into the river, converting that part of the river into reshus hayochid because of gurachas, extend and lower the partition beyond where it actually ends. Since both the balcony and the part of the river directly beneath it are private reshuyos, one may draw water on Shabbos from the river to the mechitza to the gezustra through the hole in the balcony floor. Similarly, if you have two balconies, one above the other, that extend over a body of water and the holes in their floors line up, the halacha is if the residents of both floors made mechitzas for the upper balcony, but they didn't make mechitzas for the lower balcony, they're all also from drawing water unless they made an Eruv Chatzeres. If no Eruv was made, the residents of the upper floor may not draw water from the river because the residents of the lower floor were kind of the rights in the upper balcony by helping build the mechitzas around it. Thus, the upper balcony is like a jointly owned chatzer from which carrying is usher into the privately owned upper floor. As for the residents of the lower floor, they may not draw water to the balcony at all, even if there's an eruv, because there's no mechitza around their balcony, and so drawing water would be carrying from a karmelis into a reshus hayochid. Mishnah Tes. The next Mishnah is discussed halachas of disposing wastewater on Shabbos. The Chacham asur pouring out wastewater in areas next to Rishus Harabim, since the water flows into the Rishus Harabim and therefore resembles the malacha of Haitzah. The Mishnah focuses on pouring out wastewater in a chatzah. If a chatzah is situated next to a Rishus Harabim, is less than 4 amas by 4 amas in area, we may not pour out wastewater in it on Shabbos, since the amount of wastewater normally poured out in a day cannot be absorbed by a chatzah of this size, and will therefore flow out into Rishus Harabim, and the person pouring out the water on Shabbos wants this to happen, the Chacham were concerned that if one were allowed to intentionally cause water to flow into Rishus Harabim, he may also pour it directly into the Rishus Harabim. Elam can also la'uka, it's also to pour wastewater into a chatzah smaller than the amas square, unless they made an uka, which is a puddle, or a cesspool for it, which is machzekes sosayim and a nekav ulamata, that contains 2 saw of water below the overflow hole that empties into the Rishus Harabim. Since such an uka is large enough to hold all that day's sewage, and thereby prevents it from flowing into the Rishus Harabim, the cesspool may be situated bein b'chutz, bein b'fnim, either just outside the chatzar, or in the Rishus Harabim, or inside the Chatzar, except that if it's situated outside the Chatzar, it must be covered with a dome-like covering, so it shouldn't be swallowed up, so to speak, in the Rishus Harabim. But if it's situated inside the Chatzar, it doesn't need to be covered, since it's surely not considered a Rishus Harabim. It's going to be part of that. Now, Mishnah Yud. Reb Lezer Yankov says, Biv shehu kamor, arba amas b'Rishus Harabim. If there's a drainage channel that runs from the edge of the chatzar into the Rishus Harabim, which is covered by a dome for the first 4 amas in the Rishus Harabim, shevchin l'soichei mayim b'Shabbos, you may pour wastewater into it on Shabbos because the water exits the chatzar area directly into the covered section of the channel, into this Biv kamor, which is not considered a Rishus Harabim. Since this part of the channel is 4 amas long, the day's wastewater will be absorbed before it has a chance to flow out into the uncovered parts of the channel into the Rishus Harabim. The Chachamim say, even if the channel runs alongside a roof or through a chatzah that's 100 amas long and has a lot of space, if it's 100 amas long and has a lot of space which we could absorb the water in before it reaches the Rishus Harabim, one may not pour wastewater directly into the opening of this channel because on occasion some water does go out into the Rishus Harabim, it will flow out with some force since it's poured directly into these pipes. So people will therefore think that he poured out the water right next to the Rishus Harabim, intending for it to flow into the Rishus Harabim. As a result, they might come to be matir pouring water directly into Rishus Harabim on Shabbos. According to the Chachamim, pouring directly into the biv is going to be also midrabanan. Aval shefech megag legag. But however, he may pour the wastewater onto a roof overhanging the biv, and the water then descends into the biv because it will flow out into the Rishus Rabbim without much force, and nobody will think that he did it for any specific reason, and it doesn't look like he poured it out next to a Rishus Rabbim. A chotzer and an adjoining achsadra, a portico, which explains in the previous Mishnah that in the previous Mishnah is that it's a roofed area without walls, that with columns supporting the roof. So that it forms an area of daled amos per daled amos that can absorb 2 sa of wastewater used in a day. One may therefore pour out wastewater in this area on Shabbos because it will be absorbed before it can flow out into the Rishus Harabim. Mishnah Yud Aleph. V'chein shtei diutois zu keneged zu. Similarly, as we learned in Mishnah Test, one may pour out wastewater in a chutzah with an area that's less than 4 by 4 amas if he has a cesspool. So the Mishnah discusses pouring out water into such a chutzah on Shabbos if there's no erev chatzer. So what do you do? The zach is they didn't have indoor plumbing in those days, so if they had wastewater, they had to get rid of it somehow. So what they would do is they would pour it into the Rishus Harabim, and people would walk in and they would get spritzed all over the place as we spoke. So if you have 2 diutoi zu keneged zu, if 2 upper stories of 2 buildings are opposite each other with a chutz of less than 4 amas between them, miktasan also uka, miktasan loy also uka. And some of the residents on one side of the chutz made an uka in it, and some of them on the other side did not make a cesspool in it. Halach is as follows: Esha also uka mutarin. Those who made the cesspool, the makom where the water can run into, is mutter to pour the wastewater onto the floor of the upper story, so it falls into the uka in the chutzer. Meshaloi also uka asurin. But those who did not make the cesspool are also to pour their water into the chutzer on Shabbos, even indirectly, because they might instead carry the water down into the chutzer and pour directly into the uka. They would thus violate the issur of carrying in a chutzer without an eruv, and the rabbanon therefore answered even indirect pouring ad kan.